In this lecture, I'm going to talk about certain decisions that we make about question content. We first have to always keep our instrument short. So we really need to ask before we really need to assess whether or not a question is useful or necessary, right? So if you ask in a survey question the age of everybody in the house or the age of every children or in the household, you have to wonder whether you really need this. Likewise, questions like income, right? We don't need to know people's exact income. Very often it's considered a very sensitive question and people do not wish to report it. So you're better off asking a broad estimate and giving people a range. And if you look at most surveys that are constructed, this is the reason why we give them a range, because we don't need that level of specificity, because it's not very useful to know their exact income, and it's very sensitive. Sometimes several questions are needed, so we don't want to combine two or more questions. So here's a question which says, what are your feelings towards immigrants and expats or expatriates? Likewise, or what do you think about proposed changes in benefits and hours? These are two different things. Such questions are called double-barreled questions. There are two things in them, and you need two different questions for them. We also have issues about how many questions we need, right? Sometimes if you ask a person about their earnings, they may not mention all their income because they may think earnings means only what they get outside of their regular salary. It's what they get in their 401k or in their retirement account. So sometimes you want to ask multiple questions where one would not be enough. Sometimes people need more context in order for us to interpret their answers. So if you ask people about their views about a certain religion, you want to ask them about their attitudes towards religion in general, because otherwise you won't be able to estimate or interpret their answer. Sometimes you need several questions. If someone says, hey, I support public TV, then you got to ask them, do they watch it? Maybe you want to ask them, are they willing to have their tax dollars spent on it? Notice that each question helps you gauge the intensity of their support, which sometimes is the reason why you ask these questions in the first place. Do respondents have the needed information? So if you ask people about the quality of Game of Thrones, how do we know if they watch it? How do they know if they even know what Game of Thrones is? Right? So you may have to ask a question that says, do you know, or do you watch, or are you aware of the series Game of Thrones, or do you subscribe to HBO, for instance? So you may have to ask certain questions in order to ascertain that the person has access to this particular television program and that they're eligible to be answering that question. Sometimes questions need to be more specific. So you may say, how well did you like a book versus, would you recommend the book to others? And if you would, to whom? So generally people's liking is not as reliable or as valid an indicator in this particular case as their dislike, all right? So recommendation will give you an idea will give you one idea of whether or not they really like a book. Another way to do it would be to look to see if they buy other books by the same author, okay? We also have to worry, or we also have to make sure that the questions are sufficiently general. For instance, if you ask questions about when they watch TV, TV viewing changes by season, right? So people watch more TV in the fall, and then it's different in the summer, and it's different in the winter. It's different, once Super Bowl is over, TV viewing changes, patterns change. Sweeps times in the fall, TV programs, and there are new TV programs that are launched, TV viewing goes up. So we want to be able to account for seasonal specificity, and generally, if a question is too general, you may want to make it specific enough to address that. We also make sure that questions are not biased and not loaded. Asking about the benefits of a tax cut, for instance, without asking them the disadvantages, loads the answer onto the positive. Asking about disadvantages without asking about benefits, the other way around, does the same thing. It loads it on the negative. So people's responses are all skewing towards the negative. Respondents' truthfulness, willingness to answer truthfully, has to be ascertained. And we already talked about this. Income's a great example of that. Donations, charitable donations is another example, right? If you give money to people, you ask people, they're going to say, yes, we do. But if you ask how much, you may get a gauge of, how much they do. But are people really going to tell you, right? People are going to over-report what they give in charitable donations. So these are all the issues with question content that you need to be careful about when it comes to designing surveys.